I've been on the low, I've been taking my time. I feel like I'm out of my mind. It feel like my life ain't mine. Who can relate?
What's up, everyone? This is Paolo.
This is Akshay.
We are here with our good friend Christina Louie,
Hi.
aka Kimchi, aka CL, the real CL. You feel me? She is in our program, doctoral student and good friend of ours. Mm-hmm. Also, we're all internship updates. We're all doing university counseling next year. Hey.
Shout out to university counseling.
But today on this episode of Therapist Threads, basically Christina texted me or wrote something on Facebook to me a couple of weeks ago and was like, yo, can we do a Therapist Threads about 13 Reasons Why? And I was like, yeah, let's do it. So, Christina, meticulously watch a show, stuff like that. She didn't, I don't know if she wants to tell y'all that.
Take notes while watching.
Research.
Yeah, and so we're just gonna ask her a couple questions. We're gonna have a little discussion, and yeah, let's just get right into it. I know it's a hot button thing right now. Yeah. Although by the time this release, it might not be. Things always moving so fast. But hey, let's talk about it. Yeah. So, do you want to say anything before we start about yourself? Introductions?
Sure. I have worked with young adults and children and teens in a clinical capacity, so I'm really interested in understanding things like suicide contagion, and I'm also really interested in how information can really influence people, and I'm really interested in getting out accurate information about mental health, so that's kind of like my platform if I were to have one. So this is a really important topic to me, mainly just because it affects so many young people.
Okay.
Do you want to read the first?
Sure.
Yeah. First question.
First question.
What
were your thoughts on the show before and after you watched it? Did any of your feelings or reactions change after the end?
You want to go ahead?
Do you want to start?
Yeah. I think actually at the beginning, before I watched it, I put out a question on Facebook and I asked my friends, how
I saw that.
Yeah, there was a very active thread, a lot of opinions. So a lot of people had seen it, a lot of mixed reactions. So I thought that was really interesting. I was kind of doing it as some research also to gauge the response. And it seems like a lot of people who were not in mental health really loved the show, but a lot of people were really concerned.
Yeah.
People who worked with people who had completed suicide or with suicidal ideation, people who had a loved one who completed suicide, they had a hard time with it. So there are a lot of mixed reactions. But I felt like at the beginning I was a little bit concerned. Mainly because there have been some media campaigns about suicide that are not necessarily driven by mental health professionals. And so I was just kind of worried that the suicide would be portrayed in a kind of inaccurate way. So as I was watching it
and taking notes,
meticulous notes and thoughts, I was also reading a lot of articles about it. I wanted to have a balanced perspective. So I read a lot of popular news articles. I read a lot of published articles in academic journals about suicide contagion. I read the report that Santa Clara County put out in 2016 about the suicide clusters, most notably in certain regions. And so I think throughout, my first reaction was, I thought the writing on the show was not that great. I didn't really like the show itself that much, and so I felt like it was important, and it was talking about certain issues, but yeah, I don't know. It didn't seem realistic to me, so that was my first reaction.
Yeah.
I know we talked about a little bit about whether or not this reflected our high school experiences, and I went to an all-girls high school, and we're all about empowerment, and and being smart is kind of the way that you get street cred. So shout out to my all-girls school, but yeah, that's kind of, it was a little bit hard for me to relate to in some regards. So.
I actually heard about it on your poll, actually, on Facebook. No, but like a lot of people are talking about it. Actually, the first time I heard about it was some of my cousins in India texted me, and they were like, "So, have you heard about this new show? What do you think about it?" And I'm like, "I don't know what show you're talking about." And a lot of them in India, no one talks about mental health at all. Like, I mean, even here, people in high school and middle school rarely talk about it. In India, it's like non-existent. So when a lot of my cousins in India were like, "Oh, suicide is there," they were like, "I don't know if I'm ready to watch this," and they were like, "Hey, actually, am I ready to watch this?" And I'm like, my response was, "Well, if you have to ask me that, maybe not."
Classic answer.
Yeah. So then I started watching it in like parts, and I downloaded the thing, and I felt very similar to you. It was hard for me to relate to it. Part of the reason was my family is a little bit different in structure. Like, we're all immigrants to the US, and we're all very, very close knit. So a lot of things that they're doing in that high school, and a lot of the characters that we're doing, like running out at night,
Like, bro,
not telling their parents about different things.
Around in the middle of the day?
I was like, there's no way I get to do any of that. Like, even half the things they're doing. It's usually go to school, come back home, study, do some chores around the house, and that's it. But I think when I was watching it, the first thing that was coming to my mind is like, what is the target audience, and who is the target audience, and how are they going to react to this?
For me, this show is, from the first time I heard about it, has always been tied to the kids that I work with. So I worked this last year and the year before with the middle school, doing social and emotional learning classes, stuff like that. Talking to kids about resilience, things like that, mental health, their feelings, emotions, stuff like that. And I first heard about this from one of my students, or a couple of my students. They brought it up, and the first actual opinion I heard about the show was like, from a kid who told me, I've been suicidal, I've had mental health issues. I hated that show. It was nothing like what I felt. And initially my reaction was like, okay, not watching this. Whatever it is, I'm just not gonna watch it. And then I thought, like, wow, like this show is really powerfully impacting kids in some way, whether it's negatively or positively or somewhere in between. And so, like, if I'm going to continue working with these kids, and it's something that's on their mind, maybe I owe it to them to check it out. And so my first impression of it was similar, and it felt like very much of like, your average show about teenagers, just with suicide injected into it as the main plot point, which I thought was interesting in the terms like, okay, let's see how they roll with this. But in terms of, I did find it a bit unrealistic in some ways, as y'all two mentioned. I did also relate to some of the characters initially, particularly Clay with the whole like social anxiety, social awkwardness kind of thing. I think like for me, in terms of watching the show, like it got to the point where we had this conversation among the students that I was working with, where it was like, okay, this was one experience of someone's, or one portrayal of someone's experience of suicide. But that actually led to the conversation of like, okay, there are a lot of different kinds of people from all walks of life, people of different statuses, whatever it might be, attempt and complete suicide. So thinking of this as one story, not as like the definitive story on what suicidal ideation is, what suicide is in general. So how did y'all thoughts change though after, like when you finished, at the end of the show?
I actually think that it picked up a little bit for me at the end. I liked it a little bit more because part of me was horrified as a mental health professional, just seeing all the things that went wrong. I know what went wrong, but I don't know if a general audience would know. Like the counselor not doing a risk assessment at the final, when she comes and says that she's, doesn't want to be here anymore, like that should have been an automatic risk assessment, 5150 hospitalization. Like there's so many things that...
For y'all who don't know, that's a code for hospitalization. So.
Yeah, 5150 is the police code.
Yeah.
So there are so many things that could have been done that were not done. And I understand that was the point, I think, of what Selena Gomez and the producers were trying to convey.
What's up, Selena?
So thank you.
I feel like they had good intentions honestly Jay Asher when he wrote the book, Selena Gomez when she produced this. But the fact is that it was really inaccurate, I felt, all the way through the end. To me, having worked with young people and worked with individuals who have been had suicidal ideation or completed suicide, this is not generally how it unfolds. And I think that I just wish there was a little bit more clarity around that. So I left, or I guess I finished the series feeling kind of, like a really big piece was missing. So I think that's kind of how I felt at the end, and just wondering how this will affect people who are at risk already of suicide.
You know, for me, there was a feeling, as you mentioned, Christina, of like that seemed really unrealistic, and then at the same time, like it also brought up a lot of these conversations that I had, because some of the people I know that had experienced suicidal ideation and stuff, who watched the show, who were in their 20s like myself, were completely repulsed by the show. Other folks were like, actually, I kind of feel that. They were kind of like, yo, like maybe not completely, but like, remember when all these critics were saying, yo, Hannah was super dramatic? Remember when y'all said I was dramatic? Yeah, I actually wanted to kill myself. And so I was like, okay, I could see how it just, to me, opened up oh man, like this is such a broad, as I mentioned before, like there's such a broad amount of experiences and even bits and pieces that you could take from the show, maybe not completely, that this can't definitely be the be all end all in terms of the discussion on suicide. But it just, in overall, like how I reacted to it was like, I was like, okay, well, I'm glad that I saw it just because so many people I know are talking about it. At the same time, I don't think I particularly enjoyed it too much. I enjoyed certain parts of it in terms of like, yo, some Asian people. I know we talked about that.
Who is that? Ross Butler.
Yeah. Is that his name?
Yeah.
You can say what's up if he's watching.
What's up, Ross Butler?
And then like the way they dealt with some other social issues, I was glad that they dealt with, like the homophobia and the sexual assault and the sexism and all those things. I'm glad that they dealt with all those things.
I feel like a part of it was because we weren't really taken behind the scenes to Hannah's experience. We didn't really understand what was going on. We just saw the fallout, which I get that's how a lot of people experience suicide, is they didn't know what was happening with that person. So it leaves you feeling really helpless and vulnerable and kind of upset, and I think that's how they wanted to leave us feeling. But I don't know that feeling is very helpful.
Especially when talking about suicide too, right?
Right. So if anything, maybe it will lead people to ask questions if they see these signs. But then again, the signs that were shown were not necessarily accurate. So, maybe it'll just encourage people to start looking out and, having a little bit more empathy, like you were saying, like having discussions about this and increasing our understanding of other experiences.
So I know you mentioned suicide contagion multiple times. Can you explain to our audience what it is? And you did a lot of research on it. So what is suicide contagion? And then second part, like, do you feel like this show reflected suicide contagion like in an accurate way, or had any connection to that?
Has a connection to it. In terms of the rest of the population.
Right. So suicide contagion is this idea that suicidal behavior can be contagious, so transmitted directly or indirectly from one person to another. And so the evidence is basically from studies on the impact of media reporting on suicide, studies of suicide clusters, which is when a whole bunch of suicides take place in the same geographic area, and studies on the impact of adolescents who are exposed to a suicidal peer. So it's kind of looking at the relationship that hearing about suicide or seeing suicide has on an individual. I think there's also some mixed research out there from what I've seen. So a lot of academic journals do support the idea of suicide contagion, but I mentioned that in the 2016 report of Santa Clara County, when they were looking at suicide clusters in particular, they kind of cited that the research is a little bit inconclusive. So we're still learning more. It's hard to study how one person kind of influences the other, but if we think about social learning theory, it makes a lot of sense. So I think that it's really important for the media not to oversimplify suicide when they're portraying it. Unfortunately, I feel like the show in this case didn't really provide a lot of a thorough understanding of suicide. So what leads up to suicide, what someone might be thinking about, again, like Hannah's experience leading up to her decision, how do the tapes factor in with that timeline? So I feel like unfortunately we've heard about the reports of other kind of copycat instances. So I feel like this was not a comprehensive overview of suicide. There could have been, the suicide prevention hotline could have been flashed up on the screen. And by the way,
like preventative measures, kind of,
right,
during the show.
Preventative measures, suicide lifeline 1-800-273-8255.
And we'll post that.
We'll post it, right?
Too,
Yes.
Of course, yeah.
Everywhere.
I just wish there were more, at least that number could have been flashed.
Yeah.
At the end, there could have been more content.
Like in every episode.
At the end of every episode, yeah.
Every episode,
Yeah,
yeah. They gave the warnings about the sexual content, so they could have also done that at the end. So, yeah.
I know when I was growing up in high school, we had, there were suicides at my high school, suicides at other schools at that time. And the back then, and I think a little bit now as well, the idea of the threat of suicide contagion, like, talking about this could spread it and other kids could get it, shut down conversations. And that was really unfortunate. Other times when, like, us as teenagers want to talk, like, whoa, like, someone we know just killed themselves, like, we want to talk about that, process it. Nope, not talking about it. That, no, did not appreciate that. I think, and we were talking about this a little earlier, like, my thought is, suicide, just if you think about the finality of it, anything that involves a life ending, so suicide, homicide, whatever it is, there's so many portrayals of it, right, in the media, so many portrayals of homicide. You can turn on TV any time of the day, play a video game, you'll see homicide, you'll see someone killing another person. And in this particular case, like, yeah, it's an entire show about suicide, a dramatization of it. And so just in my opinion, like, something that is so final, that has such a finality to it, deserves the respect to be talked about in terms of realistic examples. So, like, if this show causes or, like, leads a teen, or anyone for that matter, to research, as you were saying, or, like, looking up other cases, or talking about just the actual cases where factual things like signs, things like that, prevention things in terms of suicide, then great. My worry is about this show being someone's only source of suicide, of any knowledge about suicide, without any kind of other connection to any other sources or any other connection to any other people and having any other conversations. And so in that sense, I can understand the understand of a kid who, because I know that in some parents have talked about, since the show came out, like, whose kids have completed suicide since the show came out, saying, oh, the show was a trigger for my kid. And I can understand that. I can understand feeling that way. At the same time, like, the show doesn't exist in a vacuum and in a bubble, and so it's on us in some ways to provide, as you're going to talk about later, I'm sure, like, information, education, in addition to this one very singular portrayal of suicidal ideation completion. So